So now we would like to ask the same to you. Well, the 4 Democrats on the Colorado Supreme Court especially. Why are you so afraid of democracy? That's a wonderful question. Let's bring in Hoover Institution senior fellow, the great Victor Davis Hanson. Victor, good to see you. Thanks for being with us. Dagan and I, listen, we're flabbergasted by this decision in Colorado, but also the fact that the left, who talks about democracy and voting rights all the time, is mum on what's happening to Trump. What's your reaction to the ruling in Colorado?
Well, I've never heard of a justice who just by fiat declares somebody guilty of a crime of insurrection when he's never even been charged, much less convicted. And so it doesn't make any sense, especially when the statute was dealing with the Confederacy. And, you know, if you're going to have an insurrectionist, an insurrection, you don't have the insurrectionists in chief tell people to assemble patriotically and peacefully in their protest. And you don't have an insurrection with people who are not even armed. Not one of them was armed. And you don't have people who investigate the insurrection. They would want public attention and transparency. They don't try to hush things up. They don't try to suppress videos. They don't try to have a January 6th committee that's asymmetrical. They don't try. They brag about how many FBI agents we had and informants to put down this insurrection. They don't try to be embarrassed about it. They're transparent about the actual number of people who were killed and the circumstances. That's what people do when they put down insurrection. But this was different. This was a buffoonish riot that they tried to transmogrify into an insurrection. And the irony of it is, when you talk about insurrectionary language, and that's the slippery slope we're on, what do you do about Kamala Harris in 2020 that told people right after one of the worst riots, or during the worst riots in American history, in June of 2020, that it wouldn't stop? It's not going to stop. It shouldn't stop. It's going to go on. I'm warning you, it's going to go on to election. Or Mr. Chuck Schumer, our Senate Minority Leader in 2020, he's giving lectures on democracy, but he got out right in front of the Supreme Court doors, in front of a mob, and he said, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, you sowed the wind, you're going to reap the whirlwind. And then he said, you don't know what's going to hit you. That was pretty insurrectionary, if you ask me. So I don't think they want to go down this slippery slope, because it can boomerang on them very easily.
Victor, California couldn't even let the dust settle before jumping on the coattails of Colorado. Now, there are 13 states still that have pending suits trying to remove former President Trump from the ballot. But California's lieutenant governor wrote to its Secretary of State urging her to, quote, explore every legal option to remove Trump from California's primary ballot, saying, quote, the Constitution is clear. You must be 40 years old and not be an insurrectionist. There again is that word. And you are a man of many words. And this is very telling.
Yeah.
Fascists try to control language and change the meaning of words. And from moment one, the left began using the word insurrection for what was a riot. And I'm asking this, did they do that on purpose? Because that is the very language in the 14th Amendment. And you even heard Joe Biden say that again today. Victor, go ahead.
Yes, and if you read the statute, especially Section 3, it says if you are an insurrectionist, basically, but also if you conspire to injure the United States. So is the left going to say, okay, it's open season now, so you red state governors, maybe Joe Biden didn't enforce the laws that he swore an oath to uphold when he opened the border and let in 8 million people illegally and destroyed immigration law itself. Is some red state, Texas or Alabama governor say, we're going to get him off the ballot because he didn't uphold the oath of office and he conspired to injure the United States? It's in the statute. So you can see where we are. This is a long progression. This is a chapter in a sorry story of Russian collusion, laptop disinformation, 2 impeachments, trying a president when he's out of office as a citizen, raiding his home for the first time. And it all suggests that they don't have popular support, not for the agendas that they've enacted in this disastrous last 2.5 years, not for the president. And I think they're projecting, they're thinking, you know, if I was Donald Trump and we did to him what we did to him, and I was him, I would do something against us. He's not, but they operate in a mindset that they're afraid almost of themselves because they expect him to do something that they would do if they were in his position, because that's how they operate. Any means necessary for their supposedly moralistic and superior ethical goals. And I think it's going to boomerang on them. I really do.
Yeah, Victor, I do too. Just to be clear, I think in this tweet we showed you, you have to be 40 years old and not an insurrectionist. Just some corrections. I think you only have to be 35 to run for president, number one. And number two, if Donald Trump was convicted of all the charges, all of the indictments Donald Trump was convicted, he still would not be an insurrectionist because it is illegal to be an insurrectionist. But Donald Trump has not been charged with insurrection, to your point, Victor. They didn't have the goods on it.
And he never will. He never will be, because no judge or jury, whatever, an indictment would never go forward. They know that, because if they did do that, every time somebody challenged an election, like 2004 when Barbara Boxer tried to organize House members to reject the electoral votes, or 2016 when the DNC rounded up a whole list of C-grade actors who got on television every night and begged the electors to be faithless electors and not honor the popular vote in their state and tilt the election to Hillary Clinton. That would be an insurrection, and they know it. It's all based on the idea that the Republicans play by some Marquess of Queensberry rules, and they're either too timid or incompetent or too principled, whatever definition, to do what they're doing. So they play the proverbial adolescent, and they think the adult will just not respond in kind. And I think they've exhausted people's patience, and they don't know what they're unleashing.
Victor, I want to move on to this. Well, and this actually kind of dovetails with what the Democrats are doing here with trying to remove President Trump from the ballot. It's about ripping up our norms and really solidifying their power and control over the American people. And Kamala Harris announcing today how the administration plans on wasting $600 million, so more than $500 million in taxpayer funds for environmental justice. Every person has a right to drink clean water, breathe clean air, Harris said, but every taxpayer should have the right to opt out of utter horse manure like this. $50 million to the Climate Justice Alliance. It describes itself as the leader in the movement against political oppression. I believe the Climate Justice Alliance is also behind some of these pro-Hamas protests. Also, another $50 million for the social and environmental entrepreneurs who, according to its website, replace systems of incarceration and policing. So getting rid of prisons and police forces. But my point being is they're spending money on paying to create activists that destroy our institutions.
Absolutely. They sin with commission and omission. First of all, they're not spending the money or their time in the way they're delegated to do. They're not worried about cleaning up the environment, or Pete Buttigieg is not worried about getting safe highways or airways. And instead, the sin of commission is they have an overarching socialist ideology of equality result, what they call equity, that's going to be mandated on the basis of race. And that permeates every single bureau, every single cabinetcy. And they get rewarded, or they get advanced, or they get praised in the media, not to the degree that they make our life more enjoyable or more secure, but to the degree that they are praised for making us equal on the back end by mandated equality. And we all know what they're doing. And the problem is, when you destroy meritocracy and, like a Soviet commissar, you inject ideology, you bring everybody out of the woodwork that's an opportunist. We saw that with the 3 college presidents that couldn't even collectively say that it was against their speech or behavior codes to call for the genocide of the Jewish people and the destruction of Israel. And they were all terrified of this ideology that's rampant and which they encouraged on their campuses. And so it's really a war against freedom, liberty, meritocracy, the whole basis of the American creed, and they know it. And so we've got to fight it in every way possible, because it's insidious. It permeates every type of of university, every cabinet bureaucracy, and it's very dangerous. Historically, it destroys civilization.
Well, Victor, they're using our tax dollars to organize, to protest, and to lobby our federal government, which is outrageous that that's how our tax dollars are being used. But make no mistake, that's what it will be used for. They're not going to pick up trash along the highways and streets of America. It's about a political movement that's being funded by tax dollars. Victor Davis Hanson, always a privilege and an honor to have you on our show. Thank you for being with us, and have a wonderful day.
Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, Victor. Thank you.